And good evening. Welcome to Huckabee Today, a show about common sense with some uncommonly interesting conversation, more so today than ever. We usually have people smarter than I am, almost always. But knowing our kind guest, he'll deny that. What we really try to showcase are insights into subjects that you may not be fully connected to, and we want to deliver them with a little bit of sarcasm. Why? Keep it interesting and hopefully put a little smile on your face, because we need a little of that in this world we're living in. We're going to begin tonight with something that's been obvious to a lot of people for a long time. The American news media has lost its way. It used to be about good journalism, truth, and a passion for getting it right. Now it's hard to tell the difference between truth and fully made-up stories that are driving the agenda of something less than truthful, apparently designed to get some clicks on the internet and to get viewers. The truth be damned. A lot of it is self-created nonsense from Washington, Hollywood, or New York City, delivered in what I'd call narrowcast as opposed to newscast. But one thing is for certain, it doesn't reflect the truth about what's really going on in the country as a whole. And there was a fascinating development the night of the first debate between former President Donald Trump and President Joe Biden. They reported that it was breaking news that Joe Biden is not up to the job that he currently holds. Well, I hate to break it to them, but that wasn't new, and it wasn't breaking either. As we all saw, it isn't so much an age issue for Mr. Biden. No, it's a health issue. And it's been covered up and unreported by a large sector of the American media, and it's been happening for years. NBC's veteran Chuck Todd even admitted to it publicly. He's just one of the many who, under the guise of journalism, has been peddling his own agenda, an anti-conservative, anti-Trump, anti-truth agenda. And after that debate, it was as if the U.S. news media had had a colonoscopy and pretty bad results. So there's a lot to talk about, and we've got just the person for the conversation. He's right there next to me on the screen, former Fox anchor, veteran TV reporter, TV anchor of Centerpoint, and on top of it all, a good guy and even a good musician. We're going to be back with Doug McKelway and some real insights into the world that he's lived in, his career, and we'll do that in just a moment. Stay with us. We are joined by a journalist, a real journalist, a person who comes from a rich family of quality journalism. And by rich family, I don't mean necessarily wealthy, but I mean rich in terms of experience and integrity when it comes to reporting. Even his wife is a reporter for the Washington Times. Welcome to Huckabee Today, Doug McKelway. Great to see you. It's been a while.
Good to see you, Governor. Hope you're doing well.
I am doing very well. What a week to talk about the news media, because we've been through yet another remarkable time, an attempted assassination of a president, the opening of a political convention. I mean, a lot happening. But Americans, quite frankly, just don't trust the media anymore. Is that their fault, or is it the public's fault?
Well, the public can help by just tuning it out. That's what's most important, even though some of the networks now are funded by very wealthy people who will probably continue to put a lot of stuff we don't want to hear on the air just because they've got fat wallets, if not the ratings. But this has been in the works for such a long time. It goes back, I think, to the 1960s and the various revolutions that we saw in our culture in the 1960s. More recently, as pertains to Joe Biden, I don't want to toot my own horn here, but I believe, I'm pretty certain, that I was the first reporter to ask him about cognitive decline. And it was in the summer of 2020 during the campaign, the so-called COVID campaign, when Joe Biden, and I think it was unfair to characterize it this way, was campaigning largely from his basement. He did more than that, but maybe primarily from his house. But he had a press conference in the summer of 2020 in a gymnasium in downtown Wilmington, Delaware. And Fox News' regular White House correspondent or campaign correspondent was unavailable, so they sent me as a fill-in to that gymnasium in Wilmington, Delaware. And I asked then candidate Joe Biden, and I asked it very, very delicately and carefully because I was aware of the sensitivity of the question. And I had both of my parents die from dementia. My mother had Alzheimer's and was bedridden for 10 years before she died. But so I recognized the characteristics, and I saw some cognitive decline in Joe Biden even back then. And I asked him, sir, I'm 65 years old. I'm almost 70 now. But I asked him, I'm 65 years old. I don't think as well as I used to. I have, I forget people's names quite often. I lose my train of thought from time to time. You've got 11 years on me, sir. Have you ever been tested for a cognitive decline? And he jumped right and said, I've been tested every day, but I've answered the question quickly and then left, ending the press conference. I caught a lot of guff for asking that question back then, and still do in some respects. But I think it's all been borne out now. Looking at that tape of that question I asked him 4 years ago compared to the Joe Biden today, his decline has been quite precipitous, I would say. And as far as the media goes, they were caught basically with no clothes on after that debate where he stumbled and stammered and lost his train of thought repeatedly. They bailed on him right then. But I can't help but think that they knew all along that he was suffering decline and simply carried Joe Biden's water and his administration's water for him, consciously, purposefully, burying various stories of his decline and how that White House was operating. The only one not to do so was the conservative media, Fox News, Newsmax, several online publications, a lot of talk radio, and they've been under fire ever since. But it was the truth. We all know that now.
You know, Doug, it's fascinating what you say because you were seeing this 4 years ago, and most people weren't talking about a cognitive issue then, even though there were indications that he was being protected and hidden by his own staff. Since he's gone to the White House, very few interviews that weren't pre-scripted, pre-approved, very carefully selected, and mostly softball questions with some blogger, not the hard-nosed type of journalist. And the White House press corps, I've never seen a group of folks that acted more like lackeys. They would never let Donald Trump get away with failing to answer questions or his press secretary just tossing back their own words to them. So the media, I think, has been complicit in covering for the president, but it really does go back to his staff and to his family. They have protected him from looking vulnerable. And I think a lot of Americans, the debate was the first time they really noticed that. The rest of us, we've been seeing these things, as you mentioned, Fox and Newsmax and others have been covering it. But then the journalists, this was what was startling. They pretended and acted like, oh my gosh, we had no idea. Doug, there's no way they were not aware of some of these things. So how do they justify their role in this?
That jogs my memory about an incident during the early days or the early months of the Trump presidency when he won. He was asked very early on. I can't remember his press secretary was asked. I can't remember if it was Sean Spicer. It may have been Kayleigh McEnany, who was asked, you promise, he was actually asked by somebody in the front row. I don't recall who the reporter was. Do you promise never to lie to us? And we all understand that every administration spins things to their favor. That's common practice. We accept it from all people in politics. But it's an entirely different matter of order when a press secretary lies to the press. Trump's press secretary was asked that question. I found it offensive that she had to ask it. Conversely, Karine Jean-Pierre for President Joe Biden has never been asked that question, to my knowledge. I think the long knives are now finally beginning to come out because the emperor, as we saw in that debate, is without clothes, and so is the press corps that protected him for all of those months and years. But I think that the roots of this, as I said at the start, come from the 1960s, when we saw, the civil rights movement, the anti-war movement in Vietnam. We saw perhaps the story of the decade in the late 60s and early 70s was the Watergate story. Woodward and Bernstein were made into journalistic heroes. A movie with Hollywood stars was made featuring them. They still appear on various television programs many, many decades later. That sort of set an impetus in motion that reporters had to get out there and do good things for society, take down the bad guys, stand for principle, stand for right. When really the job of journalists is to simply tell the story. It's been that way now and building that way to the point where it's infected and manifested itself in schools, even beginning at a young age, and certainly in journalism schools. You see these idealistic young reporters coming out of journalism schools being fed into the mills of the mainstream media, where no questions have to be really asked by their employers, their hirers. They don't have to fill out a form saying, do you agree with our philosophy? It's understood. They look at their writing samples, they look at their resume tapes, they look for the proper wording, they look for the proper phraseology, the proper political stance. Ah, this person will fit right into our news organization here at MSNBC or CNN or wherever it may be, because I see the proper wording in their clips. And nothing ever needs to be said overtly. It's just an understanding. And then you get the fact, what sociologists call confirmation bias. People are led to organizations with which they agree. And that's the dynamic. It's not some grand conspiracy that you often hear about now, although there are plenty of grand conspiracies which have proven true in this day and age. But it's merely an understanding that you're going to follow the general philosophy that we embark upon as a news organization. And as a result, you see a lot of mainstream publications, the New York Times, the Washington Post, the cable networks, and so many others, just adopting this progressive ethos, this woke ethos, which just doesn't stand up to the standards of the old days. Even the Associated Press has now turned much far leftward. The Associated Press used to be admired for just factual reporting in simple declarative sentences: who, what, when, where, why. That's all he needed to do. This guy, I'm looking at the roll show, that guy right in that picture right there, that's my grandfather. He was president of the Associated Press in the 1950s and editor of the Washington Evening Star newspaper. He used to, I have all these letters in boxes in these closets behind me of him writing about the importance of maintaining neutrality. That's just so far gone, it's wishful thinking. However, news consumers can still find objective journalism by being reporters themselves in many respects, by looking at different sources. I primarily watch Fox News, having worked there, but I'm also aware that a lot of their opinion shows don't present alternative views. It makes the viewers feel good, much like MSNBC makes the viewers feel good because it reaffirms their worldview. Same with CNN and the New York Times and the Washington Post. But there are many good reporters out there, even from progressive publications. And it's incumbent upon viewers and consumers of news to vary what they look at, what they read, what they watch on television. Sure, watch Fox News, opinion shows, watch those primetime shows as much as you like, but flip over to MSNBC or CNN and see, you might catch a little nugget of information that's factually true and presents an alternative to Fox, and vice versa, conversely. We have to do more work to find the truth there. But if you look at it all, encompass it all in its entirety, you can kind of meld the truth in your own mind and find out who's right, who's wrong, who's spinning, who's lying, who's not.
I know we're about out of time with you, Doug, but a quick question. You answered in part. How do we decide who to listen to and how to discern when there's truth and when we're being spun?
Well, that's such a great question. You know, having worked for TBN and the show Centerpoint, I really became aligned with the idea that truth is something that only God knows, I suppose. The rest of us mere mortals are in search of it. But if you have strong foundations in your life, if you come from a good family, if you're curious about what other people think, if you're not a hardcore ideologue, because you're aware that sometimes ideologues can be carried out to too far on the spectrum of political thought, that maybe we need a course correction. Perhaps that's the truth. It's an ongoing process, you know. But you have to be a discerning consumer of news in order to try to get at it.
That's great advice. Doug McKelway, great to visit with you. Thanks for being with us. We look forward to having you back. It's always a pleasure to watch you on Centerpoint here on TBN, and we love having you as a guest on our show tonight. Take care, my friend. In the meantime, we want to listen to some of your comments. We get them when you send them to us by email at comments@mikehuckabee.com. We read them all.
Okay.
We share a few of them on air, which is exactly what we're about to do right after this very important break. Stay with us. And welcome back. What a pleasure to have Doug McKelway with us. I wanted to ask him that last question that we got in about how do you know when you're listening to something, watching something, reading something, how do you know if it's true? How do you discern? I sometimes am asked to speak to student groups, high school, most often college, university students. And one of the things I always say to them is, when I was young, and that's been a long time ago, but when I was young and I got a newspaper in the morning, when that newspaper arrived at my doorstep, it had gone through many processes before I was able to read what was on the front page. A reporter had gathered the information. The reporter submitted it to a copy editor, check it for grammar and syntax, and making sure that everything was on the up and up, including such simple things as spelling. And then there would be also either a city editor, a state editor, a national editor who would look at it for context and significance, and it would ask important questions like, who are your sources? How reliable are they? How many sources did you have? Those sort of things, to check the veracity of the story. And then if it was controversial, if it potentially had some, let's just say, explosive material, it would go up to the managing editor and perhaps even to the publisher. What I'm saying is that by the time that story came to my doorstep, anywhere from 3 to 6 or 7 people had looked at that story and had checked it for accuracy and veracity. Today, the reporter goes in the field, decides what he or she has just seen, and immediately posts it online on the newspaper's website. Nobody's checked it for anything. So what I would say to you is, if today you're reading something that is breaking news, I'd break it up first and not trust it. Otherwise, it won't be breaking news, it'll be burning news, and you're the one who will get burned. Let's see what you're saying to us. We love to hear from you. You can write to us at comments@mikehuckabee.com. This comes to us from Marianne. She says, my husband and I enjoy both of your shows. Thank you. The Huckabee Today and your weekend variety show. You do a great job of interviewing different experts. 2 thoughts I thought might be interesting to discuss before the election. One of them, interview Americans who have changed their party affiliation and the reasons why they changed. That's a great idea. I appreciate that, Marianne. The second idea, interview Americans who immigrated to the U.S. from other countries and discuss their opinions about the current political viewpoints on the left, the right, and how they are deciding to vote. Marianne, I think you could be an editor for our show. I like the way you think, and your ideas are most welcome, appreciated, and I hope we can put them into practice. We get this from Shirley. She says, great show. Many Christians avoid being critical of government decisions that are downright evil. They criticize the candidates without considering their policies. So very foolish. Shirley, that's right. I think a lot of times people try to vote more on personality. Look, the personality of a candidate may be important. It's important. I'd like to have people that I like, people that I feel like I can communicate with. But ultimately, the person that I vote for is a person that's going to put policies in place that I have to live with, my children, my grandchildren have to live with. So the policies become more important to me than the personalities. And you've made an excellent point. I appreciate your comments. This comes to us from Tiffany, Jackson, Alabama. She says, my 85-year-old mother, June, watches you every day. She's now in hospice care, so I DVR all your episodes just in case that she's sleeping. Without fail, she tells me every episode that the sign behind your desk looks like it says Huckabee, and she wants it corrected. Assure your mother it doesn't say that. I am just Huckabee, not Huckabee. I think it's somehow in the way the graphic comes across. My heart goes out to you, Tiffany, and to your lovely mother, June, in hospice care, praying for her and her comfort. Speaking of prayer, of all the things we ask you to do, it's not that far-fetched that we would say, hey, pray for us that we'll bring you programs that are fascinating, interesting, and helpful to you and your family. Our goal is always to dig a little deeper than sometimes you might see on cable news that only can, by their nature, give you a couple of minutes of this and a couple of minutes of that. We want to help dig into stories, make it sensible to you, and help you to better understand what's happening in our world. Until next time, on behalf of all of our staff and team, I want to thank you for joining us. Look forward to having you back next time. Until then, this is Mike Huckabee. Good night, and God bless.